Sorry for the mess.
No, I'm glad to see it.
Why?
I'm usually the one who makes messes around here.
Oh, yes. And I have to ask you to clean it up.
And I have to ask you to bite me.
Yes, I remember. It was an hour ago.
I said bite me twice. Anyway, what's with all the books?
Oh, I was reading a book on Rome, and then I remembered something Gibbon had written, and then I started looking at atlases.
You and your history books. You're like a teenage boy with porn.
I hope not. That's not a mess I ever want to clean up. But I was trying to remember the origin of the word forum.
Forum is a place for discussion, right?
Yes. In the last years of the Roman Republic, the Senate held its sessions in a building in the Roman Forum. But Gibbon says right here in chapter 31, Romans considered the Circus as their home, their temple, and the seat of the Republic. I find that appropriate now that it's election season and we're seeing more political ads and political performance.
Appropriate, it's annoying.
It is. And discouraging. I see a lot of doom and gloom about how well Republicans are polling despite being such a threat to the nation's well-being.
Because Democrats are no good at politics?
You don't have to be a Democrat to be bad at politics. A lot of left-of-center people are bad at politics. There's an unfortunate tendency for people on the left to appeal to reason, as if we are in that Senate House in the Forum. People on the right, however, know we live in a world that rewards clickbait. They know we are in the Circus Maximus, as entertainment, as gladiatorial combatants, and as sacrifices.
You've talked before about conservative leaders getting their followers to sacrifice themselves.
Yes, that's part of the performance too. The failure to recognize that means the lions will eat us all. We can't keep acting like we're in the Forum when we're actually in the circus.
When you say circus, I don't think of Rome. I think of clowns.
That's entirely appropriate. Roll up, roll up, roll up. It's campaign season in the United States. Of course, because there are federal elections every other year like clockwork, it's always campaign season. So welcome, one and all, to the campaign season carnival. You know, almost everything in politics is performative. Politicians? Performers. The political press? Obviously performers. And the public? Definitely performers. The most important. Consider the role of the politician. You must present yourself as the champion of the people. How you do this depends on whether you are a Democrat or a Republican. Democrats have to pretend that they can deliver on their promises, even though there are structural barriers that severely impede their ability to do so. The U.S. Constitution is, shall we say, severely flawed. The Democratic Party itself is also severely flawed, administratively decentralized and composed of numerous factions, each with their own priorities. This decentralized structure prevents the factions from working together. For example, the Democratic National Committee promotes democratic policies, but has no power over state parties or even other party units, such as the campaign committees for House and Senate. Campaign committees exist to protect and expand Democratic majorities in Congress. They will campaign for incumbent Democrats who oppose the party platform over challengers who support it. Now that's a juggling act. To complicate things further, a Democrat who wants to get things done has to be able to craft legislation that can survive the obstacle course that is Congress. It's much easier to be a Republican. You just need to demonstrate complete fealty to the most popular conspiracy theory of the day. You don't have to legislate because there are whole organizations funded by billionaires who will write legislation for you. All you have to do is block any attempt to address the issues Americans face. You also have to be prominently and performatively attacking America's greatest enemy, the American people. Republicans have long had an anti-American faction. At the start of the Cold War, Republicans conjured up the specter of a stealthy communist takeover of the United States. Even though the heyday of the American Communist Party was long past, the party had peaked at about 100,000 votes for president in 1932. Republicans alleged a vast conspiracy was in motion to deprive Americans of their freedom. The Republican response was to deprive Americans of their freedom. In 1947, pressure from the 80th Congress, which had a Republican majority in both houses, compelled the movie industry to end the careers of a number of writers and directors who had been investigated for their political activities. In 1950, Republicans in the John Birch Society published a list of American entertainers and journalists whom they disliked. Most of the people on the list lost their livelihoods. Over the last few decades, the number of Americans targeted by Republicans has increased to the point where conservatives openly admit that Americans are the enemy. The influential Claremont Institute, a conservative think tank, argues that most Americans may be Americans by citizenship, but they are phantom Americans. America, they say, now exists only in the hearts and minds of a minority of citizens. The rest of us, who aren't interested in what the geniuses at Claremont have to say, are zombies or human rodents. I like rodents, actually, especially rats. Rats make everything better, but calling people vermin, dehumanizing them, has a long history, and none of that history is good. Dehumanization is the fourth of the 10 stages of genocide. Of course, in the case of the United States, we may already be at the 6th stage of genocide, polarization, thanks to the way political media handles its role in the political circus.
Oh, you're talking about Fox News, conservative media.
In this instance, no. Political media in general is pretty terrible. Obviously, conservative media drives a lot of the anti-American rhetoric behind the political divisions in this country. But there's factions on the American left who also encourage division on the basis of purity politics. And then there's the media centrists who blame both sides for divisive rhetoric.
Oh, like you just did.
No, I did. What's missing is the context. The right keeps accusing the left of reflexive anti-Americanism. There is some truth to that, but the anti-Americanism of the left is a protest against the moral failings of America.
Well, there are a lot.
Yes, and it would be nice if the media were to report on what motivates the rhetoric each side uses. The left's vision of America is, well, there is no single vision. That's part of the left's problem. Maybe that's why they're not reported.
Well, the GOP's vision for America is Trump as dictator for life.
Not even necessarily Trump. We can see right now that the right's vision of America is an unpopular regime kept in power through an unaccountable judiciary and rigged elections, with the population kept in line by paramilitaries, local police, and the military.
That doesn't even sound like America.
I know, but major media always prioritizes balance over accuracy. I mean, they will do stories on extremism on both left and right. However, they will leave out the fact that left-wing extremists are a tiny fringe of the left, while right-wing extremists are getting elected to Congress and appointed to the judiciary.
I don't understand why they don't report it. It's the biggest story ever.
Because it breaks the illusion that America is somehow exceptional, that America is too special to be threatened with authoritarianism. American exceptionalism is one of the biggest types of political performance, and Americans are raised to participate in it. In the United States, performative patriotism is pervasive, perverse, and almost Alliteration will only take you so far, kids. Performative patriotism is pervasive, perverse, and almost mandatory. It's our civic religion. God bless America. Support the troops. Salute the flag. Revere the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Americans craft a common identity through this performance, which is good. I like bringing people together, but there is a tension in this performance which keeps it interesting, keeps it worth watching. God bless America, say religious patriots, but the same patriots will claim God punishes America with calamities for letting trans people exist. Support the troops, we hear, but protesting when politicians want to get those troops killed in order to boost their ratings somehow doesn't count. Salute the flag, but what are we saluting? What the flag represents at any given moment can change. As a symbol of American ideals such as equality, democracy, and liberty, it's worth saluting. But there are too many people in the world for whom the American flag has been the flag of the oppressor and the occupier. Revere the Constitution? The Declaration of Independence, sure, it's great stuff. But the Constitution? It served us well for a long time, but given that there's an entire political party dedicated to weaponizing the document's weak points against the rest of us, maybe not. And the Pledge of Allegiance. A loyalty oath in the land of the free? That's just creepy. Or maybe I just think it's creepy because of the rote way in which crowds recite it. You know what I mean. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. No! If you're going to say it, say the pledge like you mean it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, I got choked up. I believe I'm swelling with patriotic mucus.
Why should I feel patriotic? I'm losing my rights. To America, I'm not even fully human anymore.
That's not America's fault so much as it's the GOP's.
I don't agree. America has never been good for anyone who's not a white man.
America has always been a work in progress. The American Revolution brought about the end of monarchy, of aristocratic privilege, and the establishment of a primitive democracy that set out to promote the idea of the consent of the governed. Essentially, the ideals promoted by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. Though initially forgotten after its 1776 publication, the Declaration became associated with Thomas Jefferson's political party in the 1790s. War against Great Britain from 1812 to 1815 renewed interest in the Revolutionary era. Beyond America's borders, Latin American declarations of independence in and after 1821 used it as inspiration. One of the most prominent Russian historians, Nikolai Bolkhovinitov, suggests that the Declaration of Independence inspired the 1825 Decembrist revolt in Russia. Abolitionists within the United States used it. In 1852, Frederick Douglass delivered a blistering oratory, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" which cited it. In 1854, former Congressman Abraham Lincoln gave a speech which looked at the Declaration as an aspirational document. Lincoln said, "Nearly 80 years ago, we began by declaring that all men are created equal, but now, from that beginning, we have run down to the other declaration, that for some men to enslave others is a sacred right of self-government. These principles cannot stand together. They are as opposite as God and Mammon, and whoever holds to the one must despise the other." In his debates with Stephen Douglas in 1858, Lincoln asserted that the founders were serious when they had declared all men equals, but added, "They did not mean to assert the obvious untruth that all were then actually enjoying that equality. They had no power to confer such a boon. They meant simply to declare the right, so that the enforcement of it might follow as fast as circumstances should permit. They meant to set up a standard maxim for free society which should be familiar to all, constantly looked to, constantly labored for, and even, though never perfectly attained, constantly approximated, and thereby constantly spreading and deepening its influence, and augmenting the happiness and value of life to all people of all colors, everywhere." America has rarely lived up to these words. In that respect, its true greatness remains unrealized. People in power have usually decided to ignore them in pursuit of short-term wealth or advantage. Because of these people who have been so willing to direct American power in abusive and monstrous ways, the American empire has blood-soaked hands. But these ideals are still good ideals. The more we assert and embrace them, the harder it is to do evil and proclaim it a national good.
I read that speech. What to a slave is the 4th of July.
What did you think of it?
It made me cry.
Good.
There are places in that speech where you could replace slave with woman and it would apply today.
Must I undertake it to prove that the woman is human and thus entitled to liberty? Yes, I see what you mean. Douglas was a feminist, you know.
If he could see America today, I think he'd be disappointed in us.
Probably. Slavery is America's original sin, and we've never atoned for it. Civil War politics persist to this day. The Confederacy lives on in the anti-Americanism of the Republican Party.
And yet, the Republicans are the loudest self-proclaimed patriots I've ever seen.
It's all performative. The GOP today promotes not standard conservatism with a desire to conserve the good against the pressures of change, but Southern-style conservatism born out of antebellum politics and Reconstruction. Republicans are all in on performing patriotism, even though they have no interest in working to implement American ideals. This is because implementing democracy, equality, and liberty would undermine the whole Republican raison d'etre, preserving and strengthening an unjust social and economic hierarchy. Injustice was a cornerstone of Southern society, most obviously manifested in slavery. Federal occupation of former Confederate states improved matters and allowed the formation of mixed-race governments. After Reconstruction, though, injustice was revived through terrorism, and then through state power once terror had reinstated conservative rule. When Southern conservatives became dominant within the Republican Party, it was their style of conservatism they advanced. They found a champion in Ronald Reagan who was happy to voice their hostility to the federal government. More than 100 years since federal troops left the South, and they still regard the United States as a hostile occupying power. Talk about holding a grudge. This is what lies behind Ronald Reagan's pronouncement that the 9 scariest words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." In the 1950s, those 9 words were actually reassuring. Watch some movie performances from that time and you'll see what I mean. But in the 1960s, the federal government took its first tiny steps in the direction of protecting the civil rights of all Americans, not just white men. For Southern conservatives, it was Reconstruction all over again. And once they took over the GOP, it wasn't only in the South that you could see the Confederate battle flag.
I've always wondered why patriots would wave the Confederate flag.
More performance. It's vice signaling.
What the hell is that?
You've heard of virtue signaling?
Yeah. Anytime someone talks about doing something positive, some right-winger will say they're virtue signaling.
Yes, they see advocating for the common good as a status-enhancing performance.
What if someone genuinely wants to do good?
With no benefit to yourself? Very sus.
Fine. So what's vice signaling?
It's the opposite of virtue signaling. Instead of advocating for something compassionate to enhance your status, you advocate for something cruel.
Advocating for cruelty somehow increases status?
Among conservatives, yes. In the middle of the 20th century, conservative politicians enhanced their status by advocating for harsh, violent repression of civil rights movements. They claimed states' rights allowed them to restrict the civil liberties of their citizens, and the federal government should stay out of it.
Racism as a way to get ahead.
Yes, but a decade or two later, most Americans don't like open racism. You have to be more subtle. Use vice signaling. Ronald Reagan vice-signaled his opposition to civil rights by launching his presidential campaign with a states' rights speech delivered only miles from where civil rights activists had been murdered less than 20 years before.
That counted as subtle.
Compared to what came after, yes.
Christ, what an asshole.
I know, right?
Wait, you meant compared to what came before, right?
No. In the 21st century, racism on the right has been pretty overt again. You remember GOP politicians denying Obama's legitimacy? That's how Trump got started in Republican politics. The racism of Trump and his followers is obvious. You know, just recently, Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana said that his state's maternal death rates are only bad if one includes the number of black mothers who die.
Oh my God.
All human beings share a bias in favor of the familiar and against the unfamiliar. Fear of the other is deeply rooted in us. For a substantial number of people, this manifests in bigotry. Many politicians have used a sort of performative bigotry for their own ends. For example, the phrase states' rights indicates that a candidate won't interfere with, and may even promote, state-sponsored racism. But performative bigotry is not found only on the campaign trail. Since even routine government functions have a performative aspect to them, performative bigotry can be found there as well. As one example, let's look at Supreme Court confirmation hearings. These days, it's expected that when a president nominates an individual to the Supreme Court, there will be public hearings. However, it's been done this way for less than 60 years. Of the first 66 men nominated to the Supreme Court, 48 were confirmed by unanimous consent. But in 1916, President Woodrow Wilson nominated Louis Brandeis, a Jewish social justice warrior. An S-Jew, if you will. Conservative Republicans threw a fit, so the Senate Judiciary Committee held a public hearing. Brandeis was the first Jew nominated to the court, and there is little doubt that the move to public hearings was a bigoted response to his nomination. Public hearings became a regular feature of the confirmation process starting in 1938, with only 2 individuals since then being confirmed to the court without a hearing. From Woodrow Wilson until Lyndon Johnson, 21 of 28 nominees were confirmed with unanimous consent. Starting with Thurgood Marshall, the first black Supreme Court nominee, in 1967, the modern pattern became established. A candidate is nominated, there are public hearings in the Senate Judiciary Committee, the committee reports favorably or not, and then there's a Senate vote. It's amazing how suddenly new traditions emerge when you add Jews and blacks, isn't it? This was the process in place when Ronald Reagan nominated Robert Bork, a Nixon loyalist, civil rights opponent, and a critic of the right to privacy reasoning behind the legalization of contraception, abortion, and interracial marriage. The Democratic response to Bork's nomination showed that Democrats could engage in political performance too. In televised hearings, Bork appeared cold-hearted, strict, aloof, condescending. When Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts delivered a melodramatic speech about what he called Robert Bork's America, the exaggerated but accurate depiction of what Bork's judicial philosophy would mean if fully implemented enraged conservatives. When the American public heard of Bork's opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, to workers' rights, to free speech, when they learned he had ruled in favor of a company that had required employees to be sterilized, when they saw him lie to them and claim that his previous opinions would not color his work on the Supreme Court, they didn't like it. Bork was reported unfavorably out of committee, and his nomination defeated by a Senate vote. Conservatives protested that Democrats had engaged in character assassination, but Senate Democrats had simply depicted Bork's own record accurately. What was new was that they were playing to the cameras. Bork's confirmation hearings were only the 4th to be televised, and the Senate itself had only allowed television cameras into the Senate chamber the year before. Since Bork, it has become routine for conservative nominees to the court to lie about how their opinions might influence their decisions. They have all been strong opponents of the right to abortion, but every one of them promised to uphold precedent. They were lying, of course, but the rules of the performance demanded it. Bork's failed nomination gave conservatives a new kind of performance, that of the victim. In the 21st century, some Republican nominees for judicial or executive offices have claimed they were being borked, or subject to character assassination, any time that a left-of-center politician or opinion leader accurately described their philosophy and record.
If telling the truth about Republicans is character assassination, perhaps Republicans need better character.
Oh, burn.
I saw clips of how Republicans treated Judge Jackson in her confirmation hearings.
What did you think?
It was a masterclass in being racist and sexist.
And also playing the victim. We got to see the outrage of people who have been accused of having white supremacist attitudes for no other reason than that they have them.
What did they expect?
Well, conservatives know racists are considered bad people, and they don't think of themselves as bad people. Calling someone a racist is worse than doing racisms.
They believe they're good people, even when they're doing racisms, as you say.
It's all part of the show. I mean, when the Republican-dominated North Carolina legislature restricted voting rights in a way that hurt black voters, those Republicans did a racism. When they were called racists for doing so, for example, when a federal court pointed out that the new provisions target African Americans with almost surgical precision, Republicans objected.
Even though they had been caught doing a racism.
Yes. And remember, Republicans are taking away non-white voters' opportunities to vote because they have been starting to exercise their rights and vote.
They're always trying to solve problems that don't exist.
It's kind of their brand now. Focus on problems that don't exist, like the plague of voter impersonation, or trans women dominating women's sports. Ignore problems that do exist, like crumbling infrastructure, environmental collapse, and an excess of guns. Republicans in general are very unhappy that civilization has not collapsed. In the hierarchical worldview of the American conservative, the survival of society depends on the enforcement of rules. Strict gender roles, strict racial roles, strict rules about sex, a respect for one's betters, and an adherence to church-dictated morality. What offends conservatives is that people, when given a choice, often choose different values from the ones that they consider to be the natural order of things. You know, considering that a conservative lifestyle is the way things are supposed to be, it sure takes a lot of effort, often violent effort, to keep people in line. If there actually were a gender binary, or a racial hierarchy, if women really were supposed to be subservient to men, it wouldn't need to be enforced by law and violence. So the fact that civilization hasn't collapsed because of unmarried women, and the gays and the transes, and racial and gender equality, deeply offends conservatives. How do they deal with it? They pretend it has. I'm not exaggerating. Go look at some conservative media sometime. You'll see some splendid performances about how the apocalypse is already here. People aren't living normal lives anymore. Twitter mobs are canceling everybody. The inner cities are war zones. The only way to fight back is to, I don't know, be a good girl, have a big church wedding, pop out a bunch of kids, bully the weirdos, vote Republican. In reality, of course, conservatives are working hard to cause the political and social collapse of the United States. It's not like it's going to collapse on its own.
I don't know how they get away with it.
Performance. They put on a show, and they are very much circus clowns.
I don't think they see themselves that way.
I think they do. Today's Republicans are ridiculous, unserious people. Conservative leaders are lying to the media, to their base, and to everyone else in order to advance their agenda. Our political press can't handle that.
They should still cover it.
They can't. If something is sufficiently insane, like powerful people acting on the QAnon nonsense they hear, the media doesn't know how to cover it. Powerful people working for Donald Trump attempted to overthrow the government on the most nakedly ridiculous pretexts, and the media is letting them get away with it because, well, if it's ridiculous, by definition it can't be serious.
But they're so horrible. And if they get back into power, they're going to hurt people.
You can't point out that Republicans are doing, and preparing to do, fascisms. It would violate the performance of American exceptionalism, where bad things like fascism can't happen here.
But it can.
Yes, it can. But media people and Democratic leaders really want to believe there are sane Republicans out there. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said in May, "I want the Republican Party to take back the party to where you were when you cared about a woman's right to choose, you cared about the environment." Here I am, Nancy Pelosi, saying this country needs a strong Republican Party, not a cult.
What the hell is wrong with her?
Well, she's not wrong. A healthy democracy requires at least 2 competing political parties, although it's not uncommon for there to be a single governing party for short periods of time.
Yes, but Republicans are calling Democrats pedophiles. Democrats should call them fascists. It has the benefit of being true.
It seems to me that Republicans desperately want to pretend that Democrats are monsters, while Democrats desperately want to believe Republicans are still human.
And you wonder why I say we need a revolution.
Americans don't want a revolution. For all that we complain about our political system, it still functions adequately for millions of people to have tolerable lives.
How very bourgeois of you to say so.
Revolutionary talk is performative. There can't be a revolution until those who hold power within an existing system thoroughly beclown themselves. That is, their incompetence becomes impossible to hide, and their gross mismanagement causes the whole system to fail. It's easy to think we're already there. I mean, look around. Debt peonage, shitty jobs, and crumbling infrastructure as far as the eye can see. The American dream used to be one of prosperity and individual fulfillment. Now the American dream is to get rich enough so that you can protect yourself from the consequences of living in our horrible country. We do need revolutionaries, but Looking at the 19th and 20th centuries, their tactics have not done well in the American context. The 21st century may be different. After all, Republicans are now trying something revolutionary by saying that legislatures can override the actual vote counts in their states and declare whatever results they want. Even in the 18th century, when only white male property owners could vote, governments still abided by the results. Apart from that, Republicans are using time-tested political tactics and achieving their goals with them. There is no magic trick that will defeat Republicans. The only thing that worked to secure labor rights and civil rights was organizing. Building up political and social support to get the desired change is what conservatives did. They tried gaming presidential elections with third-party bids and unpledged electors. What worked was taking over the Republican Party, getting their own people into positions of power and using that power for their own benefit. The most effective long-term action all follows the same script. I was raised on standard American patriotism. As I studied history, though, I learned of the horrible things America has done in spite of its lofty ideals. There is a huge gulf between the expression of American ideals and the actions taken in America's name.
I call it hypocrisy.
It's more like cognitive dissonance. I read an essay a long time ago that said, being human, Americans have never been able to live up to their ideals. Being Americans, they have also been unable to abandon them.
It's still hypocrisy. We say one thing and we do another.
We're performing Americanism. That means we go through cycles of moralism, cynicism, complacency, and, yes, hypocrisy to deal with our national cognitive dissonance. It's when we're in that moralistic upswing that we can take action. The things we do as citizens are part of the show. Demonstrations are a show. We demonstrate our unhappiness with government policy. But unless that performance is translated into action, it's only a show. We saw this at work with respect to abortion rights. Many people assumed that right-wing demonstrations against abortion rights were performative only. When extremist judges with well-known anti-abortion views were nominated to the federal bench, all they had to say was that they respected precedent and they were given a pass. Why? Because it fit what most Americans wanted to believe, that they could never lose rights. But conservatives were not only showing that they were anti-abortion, they were taking action. They were preparing to abolish the right to privacy underlying abortion rights. Ninth Amendment be damned. There were still performative aspects to this, of course. Amy Coney Barrett was put on the Supreme Court specifically to avoid the bad optics of an all-man majority overturning Roe. Conservatives repeatedly told us they were going to eliminate abortion rights. We should have listened. We had ample demonstration of their ability to follow through on their promises. Look at how well they performed their dedication to gun proliferation. Perform they did, but they also organized to undermine laws that protected the public from gun violence. Apart from countries experiencing civil war, the United States is the only country in the world where firearms are the leading cause of death for children. We lose them not only in our regular school shootings, but in home accidents and suicides as well. Why is this unique to the United States? Because, uniquely among the countries of the world, Americans do not love their children. What the hell?
What is it?
Did I go too far? Yes.
Yes, what?
I was just making the point that Americans place little value on the lives of their children. They're doing nothing about gun violence. They're doing nothing about climate change. Why do Republicans oppose abortion? Because they need the babies for target practice. I won't have it.
Oh, what's going on?
All right. I'm sorry. Oh, I had a very cruel thought.
Oh, what was it?
I'd rather not say. I don't want to be that kind of person.
Are you all right?
Of course. As I was saying, a moralistic upswing can bring about an era of reform. It can also bring about the opposite. Intensified efforts to reform government also intensify frustration when those efforts run into obstacles. Remember how frustrating the Obama years were.
Oh, God, yes.
As government becomes more ineffective, it leads to demands for more authoritarian structures to meet the needs of the moment, as moralistic extremism generates support for authoritarian efficiency.
I was never in favor of that. I just never expected I'd be protesting against a president I voted for.
Speaking out, being heard, participating in demonstrations are some of the most important political performances we as citizens can do. And that's a performance that has to go on no matter who wins an election. After the Dobbs decision aborted Roe v. Wade, a lot of anger was directed not solely at the Republicans, who were responsible for the decades-long campaign to eliminate bodily autonomy for the uterati, but at the Democrats for failing to stop them. The left is very fond of the circular firing squad, and we're seeing it at work again. Republicans won because they have a strong activist base. Democrats lost because they do not. Activism, organizing, is the actual work of politics. This is because politicians recognize only one currency: power. Activism is the essence of democracy, even when that activism is directed at undemocratic goals. Republicans have a wealthy donor base, including billionaire sugar daddies willing to lose money year after year in support of activist organizations who work to maintain plutocratic power. Democrats do not have billionaire sugar daddies. Perhaps that's why when anyone left of the political center attempts to organize, it's done on a volunteer basis and often shrinks or disbands when a particular goal is achieved, a large demonstration is held, or a preferred candidate is elected. Expecting a political party to automatically deliver on an agenda and then being angry when it doesn't is like getting angry at one's bike for not delivering one's groceries. No matter how nice your bike, you still have to ride it yourself. No matter who gets elected, you still have to pressure them to get what you want. That is the whole purpose of activism, and it works. Witness January 6th. In the immediate aftermath of the insurrection, senior Republicans, including Kevin McCarthy, Lindsey Graham, and Mitch McConnell, denounced Trump's role in it. Within days, however, they had received their marching orders from the activist base, their donors, and conservative media. They knuckled under and backed Trump wholeheartedly. Democrats do not have as powerful an activist base. The activist groups that do exist often have conflicting priorities that inhibit their ability to work together. This is the narcissism of small differences at work. It is what, in Roman times, pitted the People's Front of Judea against the Judean People's Front, the Campaign for a Free Galilee, and the Judean Popular Front. Splitters. The Republicans are also subject to the narcissism of small differences, but they are unified by a common goal: the subjugation of all Americans under a plutocratic authoritarian state ideologically committed to white male supremacy backed by religious doctrine. Whereas if you put two Democrats in a room, you will get three opinions. What is to be done? We've seen this show before. It has a script. Follow the script. Every advance in labor rights, in women's rights, in civil rights, in human rights took years of organizing and activism, punctuated by demonstrations and strikes, campaigns and elections, and exerting pressure on politicians. No single component of this script will work on its own. Demonstrations alone are not enough. Elections alone are not enough. Demonstrations are a show. This show is necessary. It informs, it spreads the word, it shows support for a political position. This is a show. On its own, this does nothing to bring about a better world. It's a tiny, tiny demonstration. At best, it brings new knowledge, clarifies existing knowledge, and lets people know that they are not alone in their thinking that a better world is possible. Elections are critical, but don't think that when an election is done, the work is done. A lot of people hold the mistaken belief that electing the right people is the goal. It's not. Elections are a means to an end. They are a way of putting into positions of authority people who can be persuaded to adopt one's political positions. Activism and demonstrations still have to happen. This is the performance that democracy demands of us as citizens. Some of us are charismatic organizers who bring people together. Some of us are leaders skilled at delegating tasks and motivating people. Some of us are skilled communicators capable of spreading the word to those who need to know. And some of us are just capering clowns, doing our best to amuse, bemuse, and inform as we reinforce morale and provide, solace. Of course, politicians hate activists because we complicate their lives. Whatever compelled them to seek public office, whether it be vision or venality, we are giving them more work. But as performers in the show that is democracy, that is our role. The show must go on. Selecting a movie for this evening's entertainment?
Yeah, I thought I'd pick a guilty pleasure.
A guilty pleasure?
Fantastic Four, 2004.
But why a guilty pleasure?
You do know what a guilty pleasure is, don't you?
Explain it to me.
Well, it's not something I'm particularly proud of liking. Like super old arcade games.
For example?
Well, you know, like Joust or Galaga. I'm really good at Galaga. I like popcorn movies, Marvel movies, this movie.
Why?
Because they're fun. You don't have to think about anything for a couple hours.
That's fair.
Do you have any guilty pleasures?
I've never felt guilty about what pleasures me.
Oh, you slut.
I ask only one thing of my entertainment, that it surprise me. It doesn't have to be art to do that.
I get enough surprises in real life. I prefer my entertainment be comfortable.
That's perfectly all right. The universe is an uncaring place, and too many people have taken the wrong lessons from living in it. Pleasure, joy, is hard to come by, and I won't begrudge it to anyone.
Aren't you an opera snob?
I do like opera. You like popcorn movies. Some people like professional wrestling. Everyone should like what they like and not feel guilty about it.
That doesn't mean you don't have guilty pleasures. There's got to be something trashy that you like.
Well, I've always had a soft spot for low-budget creative efforts. Community theater, 50s B-movies, classic Doctor Who. I'd jump at a chance to be in a low-budget show, wouldn't you?
Oh, God, no. I'd be too ashamed to show my face afterward. What you looking at?
I'm watching crows. I like crows.
I can see that. You both wear black.
For example.
You both like shiny things.
True.
You both collect junk.
You called that junk?
Yeah, I do. See any other birds?
Sometimes I see a hawk.
Neat. Never see a falcon?
Only rarely.
How about a blue-footed booby?
They don't live around here.
What about a great tit?
Those are European, I think.
How about a hot-breasted MILF?
Don't know that one.
or a full-throated cock gobbler.
You think that kind of juvenile humor is funny?
Yeah, I do.
I just wanted to see some crows. Most little girls fall in love with horses. I fell in love with the stars. I fancied that I might become an astronomer. Once I got to college, however, I found that astronomy had more math than I could handle. I turned out to be a humanities kind of girl and went on to study drama and history. Which is a shame because astronomy is one of the few hard sciences in which women have long participated in advancing the frontiers of the field. In 1890, the Draper Catalogue of Stellar Spectra was published, containing observations for over 10,000 stars. This catalogue was the work of Henry Draper, a physician and amateur astronomer, and his wife, Mary Anna Draper. Following Henry Draper's death in 1882, Mary Anna Draper funded a continuation of their work through the Harvard College Observatory. The Drapers classified stars by their spectra. If one shines sunlight through a prism, one gets a spectrum. In 1814, the first high-precision prisms revealed dark lines in sunlight and in the spectra of the stars where certain elements in and around them had completely absorbed a particular wavelength. Angelo Secchi, head of the Vatican Observatory until 1878, realized that these spectra showed that the sun was a star and that the variety of stars was not infinite. He divided them into a small number of classes, labeled with Roman numerals. The Drapers used Secchi's classification system in their work. The publication of the Draper Catalogue was made possible by the director of the Harvard College Observatory, Edward Charles Pickering, and women were instrumental in this work. Pickering's wife, Elizabeth, recognized the sharp mind of their household maid, Wilhelmina Fleming. Edward Pickering was also impressed by Fleming's intellect and hired her for administrative work at the Harvard Observatory in 1879. 2 years later, Fleming became a full member of the observatory and was a founding member of an all-woman team of mathematicians known as the Harvard Computers. Fleming organized Draper's data into a fine-tuning of the Secchi classes. Where Secchi had used Roman numerals, Fleming introduced Latin letters A to Q. However, with so many classes, disagreement about how to apply them delayed the work. Annie Jump Cannon was an American suffragette born in 1863. An independent woman, she never married or had children. She joined the Harvard Computers in 1896 and resolved the classification issue. She selected spectra by their hydrogen absorption lines, which enabled her to reduce the number of spectral types to 7: O, B, A, F, G, K, and M. The letters are out of sequence, matching their spectral characteristics. For minor variations between the spectral types, she included the numerals 0 through 9. In 1925, based on Cannon's data, another woman, Cecilia Payne, proposed that stars were composed primarily of hydrogen and helium. She proposed this in her doctoral dissertation, which was the first astronomy doctorate earned at Harvard by a person of any gender. This daring assertion was dismissed at first. Astronomer Henry Norris Russell discouraged Payne from widely discussing her dissertation since it went against the common wisdom of the day. However, prolific astronomer Otto Struve described her work as the most brilliant dissertation ever written in astronomy. When, 4 years later, Russell's research led him to the same conclusion, he came around and thereafter cited Payne's work with admiration. Payne demonstrated that Cannon's O to M arrangement was a temperature sequence ranging from hottest to coolest. These days, fine-tuning stellar classification is largely a team effort, and those teams usually include women. In the last few decades, astronomers proposed the existence of dark objects larger than planets, but not big enough to sustain stellar fusion and shine by their own light. In 1975, astronomer Jill Tarter proposed these objects be named brown dwarfs. The name has stuck, and the existence of brown dwarfs has been confirmed. Brown dwarfs are found in a variety of sizes, and the spectral sequence arranged by Annie Jump Cannon has been extended to accommodate them. Beyond M, there are now classes L, T, and Y. The romance of other worlds and other suns has always been with me. In college, I minored in astronomy, and I still try to keep abreast of the latest discoveries. We have long surpassed the capabilities of the human eye, and machines aid our observations today. But when I look up into the sky, I think of those women from 100 years ago, peering through eyepieces at stars or squinting through magnifying lenses as they pored over photographed spectra. Their patient work opened a window on the universe for all of us.